What's up, horror fans? Pete here from the Massacre, where me and my good friend Danny over there, Dr. Zayas God, talk about horror movies and streaming shows from all the different decades, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and all the way up until today. Let's go back to 1990, Danny, and continue our Texas Chainsaw Massacre discussion by talking about, like you just said, a modern classic, Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So, Danny, I want to know, like, what is your experience with this movie, and how many times have you watched this one?
So my first experience with this movie is being a kid and seeing that trailer, and it's the greatest trailer of all time. I wish I would have brought down. I'm in my mother's apartment. I wish I would have brought down. I have the Fangoria issue from this year. They issued a Fangoria cover that pays tribute to the trailer in this movie. And with no disrespect to the rest of the movie and to the people who worked hard in it, the trailer is the best part of the movie. In many ways that we brought up the Breakfast Club poster for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which gave you a clue. That gave you a clue. Okay, this movie's going to be a little bit different than the original. And it goes on to be much more of a horror comedy. This trailer, and if you've never seen it, if you're watching this, if you've never seen the Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 trailer, go watch it on YouTube. It is the funniest and best thing. You have a man standing in a lake. You can't see his face. And you have this like epic voiceover. And then, as if you are watching Camelot, the Lady of the Lake throws a giant chainsaw out of the water. It is caught He-Man style, and then Leatherface turns around, and you now realize you're watching the trailer to Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. If they had gone in a direction that was going to be like that Breakfast Club poster, which gave you a clue that this is going to be, they're not taking themselves that seriously this time, I think this would have been a much better movie. Unfortunately, they start with that trailer, and then they go and they basically make a not as good, not as scary, almost remake of the original movie. And you asked me what my experience was. This is, I believe, the first. This was one of those movies that I rented as a kid. I vividly remember the VHS box to it. I remember thinking it's going to be really freaking scary because, like, Leatherface is now the titular. You know, his name is now above the title of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So there's going to be some like wild chainsawing in this movie. Spoiler alert. And I remember thinking as a kid, probably this movie came out in 1990. You can walk behind the camera. That it's a little boring.
Yeah.
And then I remember seeing it as an adult, and I remember thinking, yeah, it is boring. And then I rewatched it yesterday, and it's 80 minutes. I think there is about an 84, 85-minute cut of it somewhere.
Okay.
But it's about 80 minutes. And it took me, I would say, probably 2 hours to get through it. And I was sitting alone in a classroom at work.
Right.
With nothing to do, nothing to distract me. And I was like, all right, I'm going to take a walk to the bathroom now. All right, I'm going to go down the hall and see what my buddy is teaching his kids. I'm going to, check my phone and doom scroll a little bit. It's not an exciting movie. And unfortunately, I think the legacy of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 is that it has one of the great trailers of all time.
Right.
And it's really the beginning of the end of a franchise, because New Line Cinema, the studio that Freddie built,
right,
they picked up the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from Canon,
right,
and they really did plan in like 1989 when The Dream Child came out and the Nightmare on Elm Street series was kind of starting to sputter, that this could be their new go-to franchise.
Right.
And almost immediately, this movie got bumped to early January 1990, which, if you know anything about horror movies, that is the doom slot. If you're at a movie theater in January and you're watching a horror movie, it's usually shit. And even though it made a lot of money for some reason, Night Swim was the first horror movie to come out in 2024, and it was shit. And that always happens.
Yes.
I think that this movie has some interesting things that are worth talking about. I think both of the movies we're going to talk about today would probably be completely forgotten to anyone outside of the horror community had they not starred 3 future Oscar-nominated actors, especially, and we'll get into that with The Next Generation. But, I mean, we have a young, handsome Viggo Mortensen in this movie, years before he would become a ranger and lead a fellowship to recapture the ring.
Yes.
But, you know, it's interesting about Viggo Mortensen. He got his start. He was in, like, Witness with Harrison Ford.
Right.
And then he did, like, a low-budget, late 80s, like, sci-fi horror movie called Prison. Then he did this movie, and then he was Satan in The Prophecy.
Prophecy,
and my favorite devil of all time in movies. Very small part in that movie, but he steals the whole goddamn movie. And then from there, he kind of got out of horror and went back towards the mainstream. And of course, Lord of the Rings turned him into a, you know, top tier Oscar nominated actor.
Yeah,
He worked
exactly.
with David. Was History of Violence David Lynch or David Cronenberg?
Cronenberg.
Okay. I think he might have gotten an Oscar nomination for that or Eastern Promises, but he started being in a lot. Eastern Promises is Lynch or Cronenberg. Is that also Cronenberg?
That's also Cronenberg, yes.
Okay. Fucking Davids. Okay.
Yeah. But they're not so, like, those movies, none of them are like that abstract and weird to be like David Lynch, right? But they're definitely disturbing enough in certain scenes to be David Cronenberg. But it's funny. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, because you asked me what my experience was with Texas Chainsaw 3. Was this your first time watching it? I'm assuming it was.
Yeah. And I was worried about this discussion because I remember last time around we were talking about the sequels and you were like, oh, come on, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 is cool. It's got, you know, what's his name from Dawn of the Dead? Ken Foree, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, and he's good in this, but dude, I was bored out of my fucking mind watching this too. There's so many scenes of them just like running through the woods and like there's murders, but it's just not like thrilling or exciting. It's kind of like, okay, go ahead.
This movie reminds me a lot of Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. And I'm sure you went on IMDb, the MPAA, I'll use the term. I don't like using this term, but they raped the shit out of this movie. Apparently this movie was cut, recut. The MPAA made them send it in like 20 different times out of fear of getting an NC-17. And what you end up with is a Texas Chainsaw movie where the camera continually cuts away as the violent act is about to happen. It's very reminiscent of what John Carl Buechler went through on Friday the 13th Part 7, which came out only a year before this, I think 1988, where he was a makeup artist, and that's why he was cast to direct Friday 7. And he had all these like great gore gags set up for the movie, and the MPAA just basically said no, and all of like his bloody footage got like left behind, and it's like the great what could have been Friday the 13th movie. And I feel like that's exactly what happened here, where the only saving grace for this movie could have been, we're going to make an ultra violent Texas Chainsaw movie.
Right.
I feel like in many ways this movie walked so that the first Platinum Dunes remake could this movie crawled so that the first Platinum Dunes remake could walk, or this movie walked so that one could run, because that the whole conceit of that was, we're going to remake the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but like we said last week, where the great thing about the original is how little it actually shows. The remake is like, we're going to show fucking everything. And like this movie starts with, like, they even try to do like the almost Nightmare on Elm Street style. Instead of Freddy building the glove, Leatherface is sewing a mask together. Like, okay, there are parts of this movie that I think could have worked. The whole idea of Leatherface being a simple person stuck in this terrible surrounding where he's playing with the kids game and he looks at like a person and he goes, food. I think that's objectively funny. The first time that like he does that.
Yeah.
I think that R.A. Mihailov, it does a good job as Leatherface.
Yeah.
I think that every Leatherface that we have covered and will cover actually manages to kind of put their own unique little spin on the character.
Yeah.
Ken Foray, as a horror fan, it's always great to see him, but I mean, this is objectively not his best film. I mean, when you Dawn of the Dead, From Beyond, he's even more memorable in Rob Zombie's Halloween, where he basically just plays Big Joe Grizzly. And he's the guy that like Michael Myers kills to steal his jumpsuit.
Yeah.
But like he's even more, and like the director of this movie, Jeff Burr, he's an interesting story. He just passed away last year, but like he was like the go-to director for horror movie sequels in the late 80s and early 90s. He directed Stepfather Part 2, Pumpkinhead 2, Puppet Masters 4 and 5, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. So he got like his start doing horror sequels, and most of the movies I actually mentioned were pretty good. Like Puppet Masters 4 and 5 are really fun. Pumpkinhead 2 is not terrible at all. The Stepfather 2, Terry O'Quinn is still in that, and it's pretty good. This movie, I genuinely feel bad for him. Like I was reading that like he was fired, then they brought him back because nobody else wanted the project. then he tried to get his name taken off of it because the MPA wouldn't let him have any of the scenes he wanted or that he had written. And they were like, too late. We already started printing the film. And he was like, fuck. So it's basically a boring 80-minute, not scary remake of the original. But I feel like it could have been.
Mm-hmm. It had that potential. Yeah. I was wondering, like, because in the very beginning, right, there's a narration just like there was in the previous two films, and in this one,
beating a dead horse, right?
Well, yes.
Every fucking movie does the narration, and you're like, okay,
yeah,
get it.
But like one of the things that was different with this one though is that like they say, what if Leatherface was a persona? And I thought like, is that like them trying to build up lore and like make it like, okay, well, this isn't that family from the previous two movies. This is something different. Like this is a different Leatherface. But I think, I mean, at least from watching it myself, I feel like it's the same family. They're just not bothering to say why there's different members of the family besides Leatherface, right? I mean, did you read it a different way than that?
No, and I think that it's very weird how like part two, what makes part two great is that, obviously it is a direct sequel. It's 13 years later. I don't know if you can see, by the way, do you see like the light coming down? I feel like I'm in the Omen right now. I'm the priest in the Omen, and
You're gone, man.
This is
That's
not. I
it.
don't like. Where is it? I don't like that light at all. The fucking light is. Yeah.
You better watch out going in that elevator in your apartment building, man. That's
Oh
it.
god. Yeah. Yeah. The Omen being like the scariest movie I've ever seen. That is really kind of freaking me out. But
Yeah.
I think that in. Sorry, I got distracted by a fucking light touching my my shirt. The
It's all good.
I think that it's weird because in the remakes they changed the family name to Hewitt instead of Sawyer.
Yeah.
But in part two, you bring back Drayton, you bring back Grandpa. You know,
Yeah.
you obviously the skeleton, like the dead body that they have there, is supposed to be the hitchhiker. They call him Nubbins. You know, they have the same dead body of Grandma upstairs. So you feel like it's a direct sequel. Obviously, Toby Hooper directed it. The characters sound the same. And
Yeah.
now in this movie, there's just this weird mom who talks to her throat. Like, I like the idea that there's a young girl who's totally okay with killing
Yeah.
and cannibalism, but like
Yeah.
that doesn't really get explored at all. It's just like, oh, here's a new family that Leatherface is staying with. And I think the problem is Jason and Michael Myers are singularities. They're single killers.
Right.
And the movies always exist around them. The movie's never about them. It's about the counselors or the people in Haddonfield. And then Michael and Jason show up and kill those people. In the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, the movies are about Freddy and the characters around him that are trying to stop him. But
Yeah.
Freddy and Chucky talk.
Yeah.
Leatherface is established back in the original. He's not a singularity. He has a family around him and he doesn't talk. So now by part three, you're like, okay, you can't just have Leatherface running around in the woods. He also carries a chainsaw that makes a lot of noise. So he's not exactly a silent slasher. So they always feel the need to surround him with a loud character. So you had the hitchhiker in part one. You have Bill Moseley as Chop Top in part two. You now have Viggo Mortensen as Tex and the rest of the family in part three. In part four, you have Matthew McConaughey's absolutely insane Vilmer as the talking head villain.
Right.
And it kind of takes away from, like, that's why I've never bought into the idea of like the Mount Rushmore of horror being Freddy, Jason, Michael, and Leatherface. Because to me, Leatherface doesn't belong up there. He's
Right.
he's like a human who is like raised by cannibals. And I always kind of felt bad for him in these first few movies. Whereas like the Mount Rush, like Chucky belongs up there to me almost, or Ghostface belongs up there before Leatherface does.
Agreed.
And it's just very weird watching like how every single movie, you mentioned this last time, I think, that it kind of feels like every movie is trying to get back to that dinner sequence.
Right.
And
Right.
and having just watched the first four movies in the franchise, they literally all do take it back to the exact dinner sequence. Actually, part two doesn't, in a weird way, and that's why part two is so charming. Part two has that wild last 30 minutes inside that like crazy like underground amusement park thing. But yeah, part three takes you right back to a dinner scene. Part four takes you right back to a dinner scene. And you're just like, do they have anything else?
No. And I don't think that they do. And that's why, I was kind of desperate for anything to latch onto in this movie. And it just wasn't there. And another thing that's a problem, I wouldn't say that like the first two, well, okay. The second movie has a character that's real likable, and I think she stands out among the final girls in horror history, like with Stretch.
Yeah, Caroline Williams, definitely.
And the first one, the main girl, I think the reason why she has fame is because of just how good the acting actresses and how like realistic it all seems, right? But I wouldn't say that there's anything like really endearing about any of the characters besides fucking Franklin, you know. In this one, the main characters like almost like don't exist. They're just like ciphers. They're just like people there to experience the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's like boring as fuck. The
Yeah.
two main characters,
I
you
mean,
know,
the first 30 minutes of this movie is two characters you don't care about driving around.
right?
There's the exposition scene of they uncover like a mass grave of body parts. So it's like you're taking that from part one.
Right.
Then you have a car full of young people we don't care about. There's only two of them. That's part one. They go to a gas station where they encounter characters who are associated with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right.
And then the girl ends up in the house being tortured by the family. So it's like beat by beat, the original movie. But this one is like, oh, but look, here's Ken Foray as a survivalist who just happens to be out on this backcountry road in the middle of the night. And he's going to fight Leatherface in a cool scene. And, you know, like, I no disrespect to Kate Hodge, but she's not memorable. Marilyn Burns was memorable less because of her character and more because of the last 30 minutes of that movie. You feel like she is being tortured on screen.
Yes, yes.
And every scream and every close-up of her eyeballs, you feel what she's feeling. And you're like, oh my God, can somebody like save this poor girl? And like the end of the movie with her caked in blood, howling, like almost laughing at the idea that like she's getting away is so memorable.
Yes.
And Stretch in part two, spinning around, going crazily with the chainsaw, fucking amazing, like great. And Kate Hodge is just her character is a nothing, and she doesn't do anything that makes her stand out like Caroline Williams or Marilyn Burns. And I feel like we're going to end up saying a lot of the same things about part four, the exception being that part four accidentally gets headlined by two future Oscar winners.
Yeah.
And I think had those two actors been randos, I don't think anyone would ever talk about Texas Chainsaw 4. I think it's just one of those movies that's so bad it would have just been, it's this awful movie that nobody ever revisits, nobody ever talks about on a podcast. But because it's Renee Zellweger, because it's Matthew McConaughey, it consistently comes up.
Yeah,
listen,
well,
if you're yawning, turn off Texas Chainsaw 3.
No, I wouldn't take it personal, man. I barely got any sleep before we started recording.
I know people. And here's the weird thing: I know some people in the horror space that genuinely love Texas Chainsaw 3, and I don't. And I know that I'm calling it boring and like a not scary remake of the original. There are some things about it that I feel like it's kind of a what if. What if Ken Foree was the main character of this movie instead of like a sidekick who comes along midway? What if the MPAA had not cared as much and we got to see, because I was reading on IMDb, they had some wild kills planned for this movie. Like there's a scene in this movie where they have bodies hanging upside down, and apparently there was supposed to be a big, bisection, Terrifier, bone tomahawk style chainsawing. And if you're making a gory horror sequel and the characters aren't great and the movie isn't great, one thing that could make it memorable and make the fans love it is wild over the top gore.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like Jeff Burr and the rest of the cast and the rest of the crew kind of got screwed over because we could have had that here. We could have gotten that like super gory Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
Right.
And instead we end up with the movie that we got, which is just 80s, slowish, rehashed minutes.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, the movie's written by David J. Schow.
Who's
And
awesome.
yeah, oh, you know about him. You know who that
I
is.
I've met David Chow. I met him. He actually did work for Storm King, the comic production, the comic company that is run by John and John Carpenter and his wife. And they and I've sat with them at Comic-Con, and I've sat with a bunch of people from Storm King Comics. David Shaw was awesome. I took a picture with him one year. We talked for a few minutes about like his contributions to Storm King. I know that he wrote The Crow. So
Yeah.
like he's got like he is legit. He's great. And so like again, when I say that I feel bad for the people associated with this movie, the Jeff Burrs, the David Shows, the Ken Farees, R.A. Milahoff, that I think does a really good job as Leatherface, Viggo Mortensen, of course. Like I think that the things were in place for Texas Chainsaw 3 to be fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that it kind of got derailed by New Line Cinema kind of getting cold feet over their new horror property, the MPAA ripping it apart. Yeah, it's kind of a what could have been for me.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it because this comes out in 1990, and you were saying that like Friday the 13th was starting to kind of sputter out, right? Scream is 1996,
Four.
right?
Oh,
Yeah,
four. Yeah. No. 6. It's 1996. So Freddy 1989, when this movie was supposed to come out, was Halloween 5, Nightmare on Elm Street 5, Halloween 5, and Jason Takes Manhattan. So three movies that are universally considered bottom of the barrel of the franchise at that time, especially.
Right.
And like, unfortunately for every one of those franchises, there would be a worse movie somehow. But yeah, so the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 had a chance to be the best of the big four franchise-wise.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think that chance got blown. But again, I don't blame anybody.
Right. So what's interesting about this whole scenario, right? Because this this is very similar to comic books
Pete
in
says
general.
hi.
Hey, how you doing? This is very similar to comic books where, like, they did decrease in popularity and stuff based on the time, and like comics ended up kind of sputtering out themselves in the late 90s, right? In the early 90s when this movie came out, comics were like the biggest they've been since they were first created. There's the comics boom, right? But then all of a sudden, the industry started to hit bottom and Marvel was going to go out of business. Like, this movie is in this time period when horror movies are moving away from slashers. Like, I remember the 1990s, the early 1990s kind of vividly because I was a kid. I remember seeing like commercials for horror movies, movie posters at Blockbuster, the movie covers, and they were going to go more into like movies that were like more creative and fantastical when it came to horror. There was like different kinds of approaches, and the slasher was sort of on its way out. And I think this is a good example of that. I mean, you just basically said everything I just said too right there. But then you have this weird ass movie that comes out in 1995 with, as you said before, Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey. And it just feels so bizarre. It's kind of like, why did they make this movie in general? I think it's because of the brand. And one other thing I wanted to say about Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, you were saying that like the only reason why it's memorable is because Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger are in it. But I'm thinking with that character, with what's his name, Vilmer. Like, I don't know. I feel like that character, they really give him the chance to shine. Like, he's really the character in that movie that you're focused on. Like, Leatherface is just an afterthought in that movie. And I kind of wonder if, like, the Vilmer in that movie is kind of like a byproduct of like natural born killers and like had fucking Reservoir Dogs come out by 1995?
Oh yeah, 1992.
Okay. So like that whole scene with Michael Madsen where he cuts off the
Yeah.
cop's ear and stuff. Like I think they were trying to go for something like that where they're like, oh, we need a killer that really plays with their victim and
Well,
like go ahead.
but like I agree that like he obviously has like everything about this movie is so fucking weird. Like
Yeah.
his whole electronic leg thing
Yes.
and his whole he spends the entire movie like pointing and then making like weird animal sounds.
Yes.
He'll just point across and be like, what's happening? Like, why is he doing that? I think it's very funny that both him and Renee Zellweger were both in Dazed and Confused in 1993.
Yeah.
And that they would survive this movie and then like their careers would take off literally like the next year.
Oh yeah.
She did Jerry Maguire, he did A Time to Kill, and they were like, let's never speak of this again.
Yeah.
But the thing that always sticks out to me about this movie is, first of all, it's written and directed by Kim Henkel. Kim Henkel co-wrote the original movie. So it's like you're not just handing this off to a first-time filmmaker who has a weird idea of what they want to do with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You're giving it back to one of the original voices of the original classic film.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that in the last 10 to 15 minutes of this movie, they open up this like Pandora's box of, oh, the redneck cannibal family work for a like top secret government run cult that is trying to like show them the real face of horror. And like the guy looks like Jeffrey Combs in The Frighteners, where like he undoes his shirt and he has like tattoos and like tribal marks and piercings. And I'm just like, what happened?
Yeah.
What I'm convinced Kim Henkel was enjoying substances when he wrote this movie. There's just no other way. Like, it doesn't make any sense. The whole opening, the opening 15 minutes of this movie may be the worst acted 15 minutes of any movie I've ever seen.
That is saying something.
Whoever plays the characters of Barry and Heather, I looked it up. Neither of them had a very long career in Hollywood.
Sure.
So I'm not going to sit here in my mother's kitchen, tell you the actor names and like run them into the ground. But those two fucking characters are so bad.
Right.
That whatever you're looking at off screen is better than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 4.
Oh yeah, it's pretty horrible. No, someone opened the door to my garage. Is it my daughter or my wife? I think it's my daughter. She just let a dog in here. Man, we got a lot of action going on in our recordings today. All right, Clem, I'm doing a recording. You can get the dog out of here. Anyway, no, I know it's funny because like there's like a formula and the same thing happens over and over again in these movies, but then little details change every time around. And the second movie starts out with these guys in the car and there's this weird ass scene with Leatherface, like kind of having road rage and coming after them with his brother strapped to him. Then in the third one, it's just like this kind of these boring people on like a road trip. And, they kind of just run into Viggo Mortensen. In this one, it almost feels like a proto Scream or something because it goes back to that kind of like that high school vibe where they're all like at prom or something, right? And it's just before Scream, and it's like the characters are all really obnoxious and unlikable, right? And I mean everybody, and Renee, and it's funny because Renee Zellweger, she's a good actress. She's been good in other things, but I actually kind of think that she's kind of lame as the final girl in this. What do you think?
She has like a couple good scenes where like she's forced to like run through the house away from Leatherface, and she does this like almost Halloween 4 style like climb across the roof. And I like that like I do get a kick out of the scene where like Leatherface has been so Leatherface in this movie, and I want to compliment Robert Jacks, just like Ari Millhop. I think he does a good enough job. The movie box, the VHS box, portrays Leatherface as like a skinny, almost transvestite-ish character. And Robert Jacks is a thick guy. He kind of reminds me, and I will give him this credit, he reminds me a lot of Gunnar Hansen in the original, where he has that like body type and he has the different masks for different scenes. He does go like full Silence of the Lambs at the end with like the women's top skin and so it I was watching like I sent you this like weird YouTube video of him on Sandra Bernhard's show.
Yeah.
He passed away a long time ago, like over 20 years ago.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but he was pretty good. I like that like they've emasculated Leatherface so much that like there's a scene at the end where Renee Zellweger just turns and goes, "You be quiet." He goes, and so you're like, okay. I think that like by this point they really did need a remake, only because it's like these are the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, and basically I think 4 people total across 4 movies had been killed with a chainsaw.
Right.
And like I think Leatherface does not kill anybody in this movie with a chainsaw. I don't even know if Leatherface kills anybody in this movie.
Let's think about the kills in this movie for a second. There's actually one kill that I really like because it's like disturbing. Not like, oh, look how gross and gory it is, but like it just kind of bothers me. It's one of the friends in the group. Matthew McConaughey finds him in the woods, and he's got his tow truck, and he chases the kid down, and he hits the kid, and he kind of like backs up over him. He drives back and forth over him while he's playing like a metal song, and you don't see anything. Like you don't see the kid's head like splatter or anything like that, but like, you know, you're like, oh shit, he's like running this kid over and the kid's still alive. And then he kind of even says something like, yeah, that did it. And there was something about that I found like disturbing. And I actually really liked that kill. But I mean, I didn't give a shit about the character that he killed at all.
No, the kids in the car are so bad. The dialogue is so bad.
Yeah.
Like there's this whole talk about like how Barry used to like touch girls by telling them that they could get breast cancer, and I'm just like, what the fuck am I watching?
Yeah.
Like bring me back to Franklin talking about head cheese in the back of the fucking van, please. You know, and at least that like the kids, those annoying kids in part 2 got like a violent chainsaw, like head comes off and blood splatter death. Whereas like here, like Barry, who's the worst character I think in the whole series, I think he takes like a sledgehammer shot, maybe. I don't even remember. And then like Heather is like tortured throughout the movie and then gets her head crushed off screen.
Yeah.
And then, like, to add, like, insult to injury, I don't even know if you noticed this, but did you notice the cameos in the hospital at the end?
No, what? Tell me.
So Renee Zellweger is in the hospital at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Or she might be in the police station at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of a both, because it's like she's being questioned by a cop, and there's a gurney going by. So the cop who's questioning her is John Duggan, who played Grandpa in the original movie.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Yeah, the actor who played Grandpa was like 20-something years old, and he was wearing like pounds and pounds of makeup in the original, sweating to death under that makeup while the meat was rotting on the table. Speaking of part 1, a woman goes by on a gurney who is credited as anonymous in the credits. That is Marilyn fucking Burns.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
it's cool, but it's like, wait, so you're saying that this is connected to that original movie? And
Well, that's
wait,
weird.
it gets
Yeah.
better. The guy pushing her on the gurney is a large man. That's Paul Partain, who played Franklin.
Oh, okay, okay,
So it's
okay,
like
okay.
Kim Henkel was like, hey, actors from the original, do you want to come back for like 1.3 seconds of screen time and we'll make weird connections back to the original movie that you were controlled by a cult run by the government.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. You think that they were actually like implying something there that like the characters from the
I
first
think that
movie? God.
No, I think they were just doing it for fun. But I think Marilyn Burns being there as like a crazy looking patient implies that that was supposed to be Marilyn Burns, like that was supposed to be Sally Hardesty. But who knows? It's just, did you notice throughout the movie they used the camera flashbulb effect from part one as just like this weird background noise throughout?
Yes, yes, I do. Yeah. It's so stupid. Um, I don't know, man. There's stuff that Matthew McConaughey does in this movie where I'm like, shit, that's like borderline abusive what he's doing to Renee Zellweger and the other girl in this movie. Like that interview that you shared, that YouTube clip where the guy that plays Leatherface is talking about the experience. I actually really love that because he name drops HEB, which is like our Texas grocery store. He's like, oh, we had
Oh,
to walk to HEB to get like lipstick for Renee Zellweger. And I just kind of picture them in like a parking lot here, like going to get stuff. The reason why he brings up HEB is because he and Renee Zellweger had to get like stuff for the set, and people would see all these bruises on her from like the times that they would like throw her around in the recording of this movie and or the filming of this movie. They're not making a fucking podcast. And they were saying that like the movie's like so low budget and so like bare bones that like they were putting themselves in danger filming it. I think that
yeah.
like
I've
you
read I've read interviews with Renee Zellweger where she said that like it felt like she was like, I was young, and at the time like we didn't realize how dangerous the things we were doing were, and like we were just doing like what the director said. And uh there was a talk that they wanted to put this back into theaters in like 1997
okay.
and to do like a re-release of it. And apparently her and Matthew McConaughey had the same agent, which makes sense. They were both in this, they were both in Dazed and Confused. And apparently the agent sent like a cease and desist letter that was like, you will not put that movie back in theaters. You will not publicize that my clients were in this movie.
Wow.
And it's, I don't know if there was a time that I read that it was a sore spot for both of them. Like there's a lot of actors who don't want to discuss their early work in horror. Like I've heard that about Jennifer Aniston, where if you're like, "Oh my god, I loved you in Leprechaun," she'd be like, no, 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 no." Like
Yeah,
I'm Rachel, and
yeah.
and I feel like for a time that was this movie for them, and I
Sure.
get it. It's like there's so many scenes in this movie with Matthew McConaughey where he does things that I feel like he would do later on in
Yes,
other
yes.
movies, but in a
Absolutely.
different context, and they would be acceptable. Like when he
Yeah.
grabs the shotgun and puts it in his face and starts going, I'm like, oh, I could see him doing that in like a fun action comedy.
Right.
But in this movie, it's so fucking weird and it's so bizarre. And then he's like on the floor with his like leg kicking nonstop, and then he leaps out of the roof and he lands on the car and he makes like a noise that sounds like he's trying to imitate three animals at once. It's it's so fucking weird. I
Yeah.
literally wrote down, I was like, is this the weirdest horror movie ever made? It's certainly one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But it could be the weirdest one as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you're telling me that there's sequels in this franchise that are worse than these?
I think the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2022 is worse than both of these. Yeah,
Okay.
I think there's an argument to be had that Leatherface standalone, just the movie called Leatherface, is as bad. The one thing I'll say about Leatherface, it does have those absolutely disgusting Texas Chainsaw Massacre kills that you would expect. Texas Chainsaw 3D, I think, goes along with Texas Chainsaw 4 in the sense that it's so bad and so comically bad that there's almost a charm to it. Like
Okay.
there's like Alexandra Daddario throwing a chainsaw at Leatherface and going, "Go get him, cuz."
Oh, wow.
As this like gifable moment of that movie.
Wow.
It's so stupid that
Okay.
it's just by default it's charming.
Okay.
But yeah, I think this is, I made the comparison last week to the Halloween franchise. There are not as many Texas Chainsaw movies as there are Halloween movies, but it's the same idea of you have a great, an all-time classic original, a pretty great follow-up in part 2, and then the franchise just kind of goes off the rails. It gets so bad. What's weird is 1995, Texas Chainsaw 4, Halloween 6. Both movies were considered so bad that they needed some type of complete reboot. For Halloween, that was H2O.
Right.
For Texas Chainsaw, it would be 8 years later with the Platinum Dunes Michael Bay remake, which we're going to talk about next week. And then that sequel got a prequel, which a lot of people really like both of those movies because they're shot in a pretty cool way. They are. They're different enough to the originals. They have a lot of the gore that I've been talking about. Like there are memorable gore scenes in those movies. Like I'm just picturing them in my head. I haven't seen those movies in a long time.
Right.
But I'm like really kind of interested. After watching these two, I'm actually more excited to go back and revisit those Platinum Dunes movies. And then, of course, we had the Rob Zombie Halloweens. And then we had, other attempted reboots of the franchise that don't go so well. And again, that could be for Halloween and that could be for Texas Chainsaw. Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw 3D are both attempting to be like prequels and sequels to the original films. And they both fail miserably at those things.
Okay, well, I'm glad that we're skipping those because I could use like a little bit of fresh air after these last two movies. But I am looking forward to those remakes too because I remember watching like the kill count video for at least one of them. So I've never seen them. I'm looking forward to them. I'm one of those people that actually kind of enjoyed Platinum Dunes made the Friday the 13th too, right? That remake.
They did a bunch of the remake. Yeah, Friday the 13th, which I think Friday the 13th is an interesting remake. I like what they attempted to do with it. And I really like parts of the movie. But I also think there's large parts of the movie where it just becomes too comfortable being a traditional Friday the 13th movie.
Okay. That's interesting.
Weirdly, I think the Friday the 13th remake is like right in the middle of my Friday the 13th franchise ranking.
Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting.
Whereas I'm pretty sure after, we're going to be rewatching and talking about the remake. I think the remake would probably end up as number 3 on my list of Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies.
Oh,
after parts 1 and 2.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, because then there's really not much giving it any competition.
Oh man. Well, yeah, I'm glad that we had this discussion because I wanted to hear what you thought about these two sequels. It was kind of a challenge getting through them, but I don't know. I like Matthew McConaughey in general. I just wanted to hear like what the fans thought about this movie, how it did, and you delivered, man. It's funny. I just want to do a little plug for my other channel, Comic Books Transformed. Brian and I just covered Deadpool Wolverine. And during that discussion, we had to review or rank all the MCU movies. And then we had to rank all the Fox X-Men movies. And so we did that. And it's kind of funny because it seems like with every franchise, there's like the gold standard movies that everyone agrees upon. And then once you get to a certain point, there's like this drop off. And that's where everyone starts to disagree about what's great about them. And it sounds like whether it's Leatherface or Captain America, you know, it doesn't matter which franchise you're in, there always reaches that point.
Yeah.
So you guys go check out that review on Comic Books Transformed if you want. But Danny, why don't you talk about what is coming up on the Lacercast?
Well, we just posted our Texas Chainsaw 1 and 2 review. That it's live on the channel. We're going to be covering the remake and prequel remake next week. We also have a whole bunch of M. Night Shyamalan and Shyamalan adjacent movies that we have covered: The Visit, The Split, Unbreakable, and The Village. And next week we are going to be reviewing his latest film, Trap, starring Josh Hartnett. I also have a couple of shorts out there now, including the movie Oddity, which is in theaters now, so you can check that out. Am I missing anything?
No, that's good, man. That's good. You got a convention coming up soon too, right?
So I was the next big thing that we're doing is, I mean, we're going to Comic-Con in October, October 17th to 20th, and we're very excited because Mike Flanagan, Kate Siegel, Rahul Kohli, and Carla Gugino from Fall of the House of Usher and Blind Manor, and obviously the whole Flana family, Flanaverse, are going to be there. So we're going to be meeting them when we go there. I'm sure they're going to be doing some type of panel discussion, like at one point, which I will be getting into and seeing. But yeah, we're very excited for that. Charlotte and I might end up going to New Jersey Comic-Con in a couple of weeks. We're not really sure. We have to figure out our schedule. I was going to go to Monster Mania this summer, but I worked summer school and things kind of got bogged down. So we're going to end up skipping that one. We went earlier this year.
Okay. All right. Well, that's cool, man. I know that San Diego Comic-Con is happening this weekend. A lot of shit going on. Good.
Isn't it great of them that they're just flat out spoiling all of these big things for a movie that people were planning to see that weekend?
Oh, they're spoiled. Yeah, Deadpool and Wolverine. Yeah. There's some cameos in that movie that I actually didn't know about. I'd heard about a few of them, but then there's some where I'm like, oh shit, they kind of blew my mind. You'll see that if you guys go check out my review. But yeah, no, it's lame when they fucking spoil that shit. But you know what? We are still going with our Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We're keeping that saw buzzing, and we can see you guys next week for those 2 Platinum Dune remakes. So we'll see you guys